So, here we are. This is specifically talk about David Bowie. Okay, you got that camera on?
It's on now.
It was August the 20th, 1972. I just turned 18 and was about to start at art school. A period of huge change and transition was underway. I was ready for anything. The place was the Rainbow Theatre, Finsbury Park, a vast Art Deco auditorium, now a Pentecostal church. The event was a concert. You entered into a decadent world, part Bieber, part cabaret, with a touch of Clockwork Orange. It was the current zeitgeist, all under one roof. The background music was Walter, now Wendy Carlos, playing Beethoven on a Moog synthesizer with an audience full of the glitterati of the time. The support set was by a promising new band called Roxy Music, complete with Brian Eno in full makeup and black feathers. After that came Lindsay Kemp with his dance troupe, clambering up scaffolding, preluding scenes from his Flowers production, based on Genet's novel. Then, under a single spotlight, a single figure in a jumpsuit with flame red hair stepped out. It was Ziggy Stardust. The future starts here. This event was an epiphany for me, with the cultural shift of the 60s finally making way for the 70s. Most people up to then, including myself, were still caught up at the tail end of the hippie era, with cheesecloth and loon butts still in evidence. David Bowie had been generating this new cosmic otherness since Space Oddity in 1969, and this was his major breakthrough. For me, it indicated a new artistic language that was bold, courageous, outrageous, contagious, and thrilling. It also signalled to me that when you are at art school, you should have a complete freedom to invent yourself, reinvent yourself, seize opportunities, and take risks. Not that easy though. Art schools in the 70s were either hotbeds of political activity or rather traditional and academic. When I started at Camberwell, I thought I had made a big mistake. However, I persevered with my rather uninspiring graphics course, but then decided to break away and concentrate on photography and printmaking, much to the displeasure of my tutors. Bowie was always a presence. In 1974, I started sharing a flat in Brixton with my school friend, Peter Parker, who is here tonight, where we recreated Warhol's Factory after a fashion, but there was a lot of dressing up. Around this time, Bowie had announced he was bisexual, which confused people in those days. It was also a little shocking. Whatever it was, it felt liberating and daring. Lock up your daughters and sons. These lyrics summed up that period. She's so swishy in her satin and tat, in her frock coat and bippity-boppity hat. Oh God, I could do better than that. In 1975, Bowie was moving on again. The dark visions of Orwell's 1984, and then his flirtation with American soul music, young Americans. It was always new sensations. At that time, I felt I was in sync with Bowie's creativity. There was always a new album for the various stages of my career, stretching through 3 London art schools up to my first exhibitions, and it was all in real time. Bowie said this: the song has to take on a character, shape, body, and influence people to an extent that they use it for their own devices. It must affect them, not just as a song, but as a lifestyle. Indeed. By 1976, my last year at Camberwell, Bowie released Station to Station, which began a new phase, a stark, Teutonic image and persona, black and white, strobe lights, sharp definition. My work was embracing the post-pop culture of that time. I was pretty fearless, living and working for the moment and celebrating social and sexual liberation. I was the college DJ, which I considered to be a performance. Heavily influenced by Bowie, with dramatic lighting and wearing a white boiled suit and fluorescent pink socks, which I still have and I am wearing tonight. So they've lasted all that time. My degree show was controversial as I hadn't followed the course. I was told by my external examiners I was either a huge success or a complete failure. I ended up with a job back at Camberwell lecturing, so it all worked out. The degree, I started my MA printmaking course at Chelsea that September, on the cusp of the punk era. I found myself at the epicentre, King's Road. This is where it was. I was there. Then there was the cultural melting pot of the Blitz Club. All this with a backdrop of sound and vision, 40 years ago this month. Bowie had by then relocated to Berlin and was collaborating with Brian Eno, releasing Low and then Heroes. Eno was another big influence. His working methods and inventive approach linked with my techniques and practice of using collage and text. I started using Eno's oblique strategy cards, a set of worthwhile dilemmas for artists. One Bowie lyric from 1977, which summed up this anarchic, spontaneous period. It also makes use of William Burroughs' cut-up technique and words tumbling over each other is, "It's Monday, slither down the greasy pipe, so far so good, no one saw you, hobble over any freeway, you will be like your dreams tonight." So many of Bowie's songs are about death, madness, drugs, religion, paranoia, isolation, and alienation. Not your regular pop star. These visionary lyrics were informing me more and more about my own existence. A telling line from Win in 1975 is, "I never touched you since I started to feel." By 1978, I visited New York, which almost instantly changed all my perspectives. Unlike now, the city was pretty wild and dangerous in those days, but I was ready for America. In 1982, I made a Bowie pilgrimage and visited Berlin by train. The wall was still up, and the atmosphere was, as I imagined, edgy and claustrophobic. People, very recently, have commented about where my prints between 1983 and 1994 are. My answer might match Bowie's career path at that time. Disillusionment, Thatcherism, city trading, heavy drug use. Actually, I was developing my painting and making films. Bowie had a strong work ethic, which I admired. Fashions and trends were always fed through his oblique filter. He had managed to cross over into many different worlds and media, and had retained his integrity. In Lazarus, one of his last songs, he says, "I got drama, can't be stolen, everybody knows me now." Incidentally, it is the Mercury Prize tonight, and he's being celebrated. Black Star, his last album, is up for a nomination, and it's actually happening tonight, and there's going to be Lazarus being played by the cast of the play Lazarus, which is coming to London soon, November I think. So that's all very interesting, and it's coincidental that I'm doing this tonight as well. I started making music myself, at first as a side project, but then it became another creative expression for me. Bowie, Eno, and other contemporaries were the initial catalyst. I met David Bowie at a party at Barney's in New York in the year 2000. I was about to do window displays, and I was high on painkillers for broken ribs from a week earlier in England. a bit of a long story, which I won't go into now, but that was setting the scene. I think we talked about shoes for 10 minutes, avoiding anything about art or music. It was all very surreal, it was all very Bowie, and it was also pure Warhol. Then, there were the silent years after his heart attack in 2004, when the world became a fearful place post 9/11. A verse from 2003 reflects this mood. These blackest of years that have no sound, no shape, no depth, no underground, what a dog. I was working one day in my studio. Where has Bowie gone, I thought. We really need him now. The world has turned into one of his songs. Then I thought, he may just be getting on quietly like me. He'd actually become invisible. A downtown Manhattan artist with a low profile. Good for him. And suddenly, in 2013, there was a new album, The Next Day. Out of nowhere, no interviews, no public appearances, so understated, so clever. I also admired his intelligence and rest of spirit, and most recently, I was astonished and humbled by how he was able to face his own death with such composure, dignity, and creativity. It turned his entire life work into a work of art. One lyric from 1979 sticks with me. In the event that this fantastic voyage should turn to erosion and we never get old. Well, lost. Anthony, where's it gone? Here we are. Got how to sink there. Well, he never did get old. But curiously, Bowie's death, although it ends a whole extraordinary era, it has re-energized me and made me think about mortality. I'm only a few years younger than him, so I'm now bashing out things with a new urgency. Hence, this new series, where I've tried to sidestep what is expected from a tribute print. On a lighter note, 3 things that Bowie enabled me to do. Dye my hair, over and over and over and over again. Celebrate my diversity and everybody else's. Wear high-waisted white sailor pants with impunity. One last Bowie quote, tongue-in-cheek. I'm an instant star. Just add water and stir. Thank you. Any questions I'd like to, especially about this new series? I sort of touched on these in that. It's what I said. I said there sidestepped the idea of a tribute print because I thought there was a whole rash of tribute this to David Bowie, tribute that to David Bowie, and I thought, well, I don't really want to join that sort of rabble, as it were, and I wanted to do something which is just a continuation of what I do anyway, make it my own, but also reference him, use his image really. So it's actually, I was using what he called his mugshot, which was when he was arrested. Does anyone remember when he was arrested?
I was going to ask you that question. Yes. Did you particularly see it in that?
Yes, it was the sort of mugshot. It was in America. I don't know when that was. I think it was probably the mid-70s.
Yeah, I think it was 77.
Yes, it was a drug bust, wasn't it? Yeah. And it's the thing is that because it's a mugshot, it's rather like a passport picture, so it's kind of expressionless. Yeah. And so what I was trying to do was use his face almost like a canvas. And he would be pleased to sort of say like a blank canvas, because in a way, with all his different characters he invented, he was using himself as a blank canvas. himself. So what I was doing was pretty much the same kind of thing, but laying my own ideas on top of the images. The one image, I was very disciplined about using just one image, and I thought that's the only way it's going to work, because if you actually look through these and look through the ones that aren't framed, some of them the image becomes almost not there. So it's like I wanted to use it so they would work well in a series. So you'd have to sort of relate to one and look at another and say, ah, yes, the face is still there. So the face keeps coming and going. So
I think the point you made about the passport picture is really interesting, because he's clearly travelled many places artistically and I guess globally as well, right?
Yes. Yes.
And it's a good reflection of his diversity.
Yes.
As you've shown.
Yes. Well, that's the sort of thing, because he was kind of going around in my head and making me think of an awful lot of things, just pretty much triggered by his death. And the fact that his death affected a lot of people, they didn't realise it was affecting them, because they just thought, well, just another rock star dies, but this was particular with him. And I think you said that to me, didn't you?
Yeah, I mean, the number of people who sort of actually sent me emails, and I mean, I'm no more than just the average Bowie fan, but it was people who had obviously, they somehow felt that, I think it conjured up the whole era.
Yes.
So it's quite appropriate to have it here in your retrospective.
Yes. Well, another thing, it very kind of neatly bookends what I've done with this entire body of work, because some of the early images, which are upstairs, are two of Bowie from 1977, and I was doing that when he was doing all what he was doing in 1977, and I brought it up to date rather sadly. It's just happened that way. It is pretty much celebrating what he's done for me in a lot of ways, because as I've said, he's been been sort of working alongside. And the thing is, it's not, I've never thought of myself as a sort of fan, because I've never sort of, doesn't sort of come into my sort of vocabulary being a fan of anything. But I've just sort of thought, oh, well, he's a sort of fellow artist who's, had a lucky break and is very talented, and you've got to see it in that same way, that you're working alongside other artists, and you've just got to pick up on what everybody else is doing. And certainly in the 70s, there was a very sort of cross-fertilisation of people working together, and there's a lot of people thinking along the same lines. I think that's what made it all very interesting. And he, the thing is, he wouldn't probably deny this, but he when you said, if you're a sort of genius, you steal ideas. If you're just not the genius, you borrow them. Which there's quite a lot in that, actually, because if you actually go around just pinching other people's ideas and just sort of just rehashing them, that's no good. But if you actually take a genuine one idea, somebody else's idea, and actually recreate it in your own image.
I think Steve Jobs is a good example of that. In his career, yeah.
Well, there we are.
Didn't really invent much, but what he did was he reappropriated and designed it much better than anyone else did.
It might be a lot to do with presentation, and as we live in a world that's a lot about presentation, and sometimes you think it's all about presentation, you start to think that. I think what I'm trying to trace back, certainly through this exhibition and what I've arrived at, is that sort of journey, and how different that journey was in different periods, and it's just gone. But it still rolls on, and with this show, I mean, I'm unsure how it's all going to look, because it's worked from such a big span of time. So I wasn't really sure whether it was all going to work together, and I was quite surprised when I saw it up. I thought, oh, it's all one piece, and then I suppose I could have thought, oh, I haven't changed very much. I've kind of got stuck. But
I wonder if I could ask you
Yeah.
a couple of things.
Yeah.
Someone does. You've talked a lot about Bowie's influence on you and how it came at various significant points. And I was just thinking, we talked about reinvention and I was just thinking about the Beatles and the way in which the Beatles reinvented themselves or were reinvented in the late 60s, and that's a whole lot of vicious stuff. And bearing in mind that David Bowie started off in a pretty sort of meat and potato sort of way, going around the country and all the rest of it. I can't claim Richard's intensive influence with David Bowie. The one thing I can claim is that when I was looking up various things to do, partly with the club that my slightly infamous uncle ran in Stockport in the late 60s and early 70s, a place called the Poker, I discovered through the marvels of Google that David Bowie had once tried to do a gig there, and it had all fallen apart, and he was forced thereafter to sleep all night on Stockport Station. So clearly there was a phase in David Bowie's career where he was really doing the meat and potato stuff and going all around the country. And I just wonder, when the light came on for everything that he's talking about, and whether in fact the example of the way in which the Beatles have reinvented themselves.
This could go on forever. Because we could all go back to Beatles, couldn't we, Peter? Because before all this was the Beatles, of course. So very sort of was the next generation of influences, I would say, because the Beatles very much represented the 60s, and I think that Bowie pretty much represented the 70s. And I think is that too basic and simplistic? But I think that's kind of almost sums it up. Who represented the 80s? I'm not sure, but. But I think you can be as basic as that about that, and I could go back further than I went back to that time when I in 1972. But yes, I could definitely trace much further back and what was happening then. But it would be a different story, I suppose.
Could I just say thank you very much indeed for a fascinating talk, and. I wasn't aware, I've got to say, admit, I wasn't aware of your work properly until today. And I really love everything I'm seeing, not just the Bowie stuff, which is of special interest to me, but I've been upstairs as well, so I see what you mean about those early pieces. So I can't believe that I wasn't aware of this great work before, and I certainly will be henceforward. So then coming back to these Bowie prints, I think are especially interesting for me. And I suppose the question I'm curious about is whether your work may have come onto his radar. I mean, I think that I've got a feeling that Bowie would really have liked and appreciated what you're doing here. Yeah. In fact, some of these, I love the way that you've got lyrics from the songs or titles from songs.
Yes.
And there's something about the way you've put the thing together that actually does evoke, for me, the feeling in some of those lyrics and songs.
Yeah. Yes.
And this is stuff that I think Bowie would be absolutely have been into. And again, the fact that you've got this sort of template of his mugshot, and then as a sort of blank canvas.
Well, I would be able to.
I think he would have loved all of that.
I would be able to probably tell you more if we talk more about other things other than shoes. But I think the shoe story is quite interesting because the event I was at Barney's was a reception for Manolo Blahnik, the shoe designer, because he had a display in the windows before me. And he had these giant shoes, but Bowie loved all the Barney's windows. Apparently, he was a great fan.
Oh, you did the Barney's windows?
I did the Barney's windows, and I was the next one up.
Yeah.
But I hadn't started yet. Because I had these broken ribs and I was on painkillers all the time, I didn't know whether I was going to be able to do it. And I was just so frustrated because I had all these ideas of what I was going to do. And it's pretty high profile because it's on Madison Avenue. And I thought, God, the whole world's going to be seeing this. So I thought, well, I've just got to get better and do it. Get out of my bed like Hillary Clinton, prove myself. And the thing was, I had images of Matisse on his deathbed, virtually on his deathbed, when he was like doing those big cutouts, and he was just pointing at things with a stick, saying that bit there, that torn bit over there, that bit there. And I just thought, well, I'm probably going to be relegated to being like that, sort of sitting there in the corner, pointing out where things should go. It was actually, it was quite like that. The thing was, because there was no outward, evidence of my injury, people just thought I was just putting it on.
You say the ribs were broken?
Yes. I was kicked by a horse in a field.
Whoa.
but I've heard that broken ribs is about the most painful you can get, so that's awful.
Yes, but the thing is, there's no outward sign. You feel a complete idiot. You can suddenly you're sort of bent double in the street. it's just not good at all.
But I think that Bowie must have, if you then did actually succeed in doing that with no display.
You probably would have seen the windows. Yes.
And I just think I'm just sure it's just very sad that he's not here to. And some of these would have made excellent covers, for the records and the albums. It's a bit later in a way, possibly, or maybe not actually. Yes. I don't know. But
can I just mention your book to everybody?
Yeah, sure.
You've written a book about Mike Garson, who was Bowie's pianist for many years. In fact, as far back as Aladdin Sane. Is that true?
Well, even further back than that, Mike was recruited as a pianist for the live tour of Ziggy Stardust in America, because Mike Garson is American.
Yes.
He's an American jazz pianist.
Yes.
When Bowie arrived in America to bring Ziggy to America,
yes.
He had the brainwave of having an avant-garde
jazz
piano,
pianist,
which is typical of Bowie, to throw in something different to the mix. So he put out his feelers and auditioned Mike, and within days Mike was touring America with these young northern, the rest of the band were from Hull, so it's like these northern lads from England. Mike was a few years older, and it sort of went from there.
Yes, I wondered how that came about.
Yeah. And he was still playing with him as late as 2006, so it's quite a long career. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Yes.
But thank you for mentioning. Yeah.
Yes, and
it's called Bowie's Piano Man.
And you've also got an album.
I don't want to be self-promoting.
No, I'm promoting you. You're not self-promoting.
The book is called Bowie's Piano Man, and the album is called Bowie Songs, because I'm also a pianist, and I've always been fascinated for many, many years with trying to interpret Bowie's songs acoustically, just for piano and voice. So we're working on an album which does that. And I want to stress that it's not since Bowie's death. I've been working on this for about a year and a half. And as you
said, did he know about this?
He did actually, yes, and he gave the thumbs up for it to go on his website and this sort of thing. But the problem is, like you said, there's been after Bowie died, there's just this complete explosion of tribute activity, and so it's hard to see the wood for the trees. But some of us, I think, like yourself and myself, have been sort of fascinated by this kind of thing for a little bit longer.
Well, and also sort of holding back a bit as well, and not being too sort of. Not doing something straight away. I mean, you thought I ought to do something straight away, didn't you, at one point? I thought I ought to get in and cash in or something.
Actually, do what straight away?
It wasn't quite the word you used.
Very okay. No, I don't think there is. I demand the right to reply. I think, to be blunt, there was so much tosh being talked about Bowie, for which I don't necessarily accept the New Statesman tribute issue, although there were some good things in it. That I just felt rather frustrated that someone who had been there and bought the T-shirt several times over 3 decades, that it was important that came forward. But we have, for the cognoscenti, we have a situation now where some of the froth has gone away, and I think actually, just picking up on what I said, that. To have a retrospective here today, which puts Bowie both in his pop context and in his sort of time context, and doesn't necessarily go off on some of the wilder.
Well, that's what I wanted. I wanted to have my own context for it. I didn't want it just to do it out of the blue, and that's probably why it just seemed to fit in very neatly with this show.
Yeah.
And it does.
Could I just ask, because I don't know whether it is unusual, but having known a lot of this work since it was sort of first on the kitchen table, but you talked in your talk, you mentioned and quoted a lot of Bowie's lyrics, and one of the things about your pictures is that the words are, they're not as important as the image, but they've always been an important part.
Yes.
Whether it's the title of a picture or where you incorporate text.
Yes.
And I just wondered if you wanted to just say something, because as far as I remember, you used Bowie quotes for other much earlier work as titles of pieces, and I just wondered if you'd like to talk a bit about where the words come into your art.
Well, it's just the way things are in your head, moving around your head, I suppose, and often like a title or a set of words is there first before the image, which was interesting for me, and I suppose words were always important, and I think it's often more the sound of words than the meaning. And I'm sure that Bowie had that as well, the way words just slotted in, and using this cut-up technique that William Burroughs used, and just basically just cutting up words and just laying them all out and seeing where they fall. You can get actually more meaning out of that than just actually just writing things that you know logical things down on a sheet of paper. You just cut them all up, and it's amazing what logic you can find out of mixed up words. And I think it's probably a lot to do with that and that wordplay, and the way Brian Eno came in and was playing around with sounds in the same way and collaging sound. I was collaging, with paper and things, and to me it all was the same thing. And the thing I would like to stress is that all art forms are the same to me. I mean, I just don't understand why people are dividing things all the time and very sniffy about things, especially when you're. I touched on the fact that art schools, definitely in the 70s, were very traditional and not very flexible. And and if you couldn't go into other departments very easily. It was all very sort of structured. And I broke all the rules, and I made friends, as you well know, I made friends in lots of different departments. And I was in the graphic department, but I was in the fine art department. I was meeting textile people, fashion people, sculpture people. Everyone was together. And people said, why are you going in another department? Why do you know those people? And I just thought, God, I mean, this is why World War started. My God, this is just an art school. And I just thought, well, that's just how it seemed. It seemed very natural. And just going back to Bowie, he was doing a lot of that. He was working with different people. He took chances. He got, an avant-garde jazz musician.
He felt very strongly about breaking down the barriers as well. And as did Mike Garson, because he was playing piano, jazz, then classical, then rock. And he got spurred by his friends from the jazz establishment for joining Bowie. And then people in rock were spurning him for playing jazz. And then one of the reasons he bonded with Bowie was that David Bowie felt passionately about exactly what you're saying, breaking down these barriers.
It also set up problems because, unlike now, people weren't as liberated in all sorts of ways as they are now. I mean, there's much more, probably with the internet, there's lots more cross-fertilisation through lots of different people, different sorts of people, all kinds. You didn't get that so much because people were far more isolated. And someone like him kind of was almost on his own in trying to, standing there, he said, I'm bisexual, I'm dressed up, I'm looking like a woman suddenly. And he went, oh my God, and he was, it was like a bit shocking really, because everything was quite staid and sort of very old-fashioned, I think, at that time. And I always used to think, when I was, I suppose, a teenager, that I wish I was born sort of 6 years old earlier than I was. I thought I would have experienced the 60s more, because really I had the sort of tail end of the 60s. I mean, I suppose I was in my late teens, well, early teens really, in the mid 60s onwards. So I wasn't sort of 16 until 1970. So yes, I mean, I was appreciating the 60s, but not in the way that I could have done if I was 6 years younger. But I decided, mainly through the journey that I've just described, that no, not at all. I was at exactly the right place at the right time, because I had a bit of this, bit of that, bit of all the way through. And just to make myself feel really old, born pretty much the same year as rock and roll, really. Well, actually, Rock Around the Clock, I think, could be actually seen as the first kind of bona fide rock and roll record. So I think that might have been maybe a year 55. Was it 55?
I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think it might have been 55. All right, slightly older than rock and roll then. So I really do feel absolutely antique. But I was just thinking about this show, and since this show's been on, I actually feel old and young all at once, all at the same time, simultaneously. It's quite interesting that this work has transported me back. Talking about this has transported me back, but I'm also here in the present as well, and I'm still functioning, just about. And just able to describe it and talk to people about it, which is what is, I think, is good. To have a showcase like this and able to be terribly self-indulgent and talk about yourself a lot. And I have to say, especially to Jill, for putting up with me being very self-indulgent with this show in a lot of ways, because it's kind of, it is a journey back through my life, which is, it's, some of it's current, but some of it's old. And it's to me, it all makes sense.
Richard, thank you so much. Absolutely superb talk.
Lovely.
Very interesting. Very young to me. Thank you. I just hope, if you're willing, that anybody can ask you anything. Go round. Please have a drink. Please buy, which is why we're all here. And a big thank you for coming and supporting. Thank you.
Thank you.